I'm Leta Powell Drake, and I've been in television for almost 60 years now. I'm from Duluth, Minnesota. And the curious thing is, at the University of Minnesota, my theater director was Dr. William Morgan. And in my senior year, I did a lot of plays with him. And he was a fine, fine director. He left in my senior year to come to the University of Nebraska Theater Department and offered me a graduate assistantship in theater. So I thought, Lincoln, Nebraska? That's the home of Charlie Starkweather, who killed all those people, and Carl Shapiro taught the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, taught in the English department. I'm going to Lincoln, Nebraska, and that was 1960, and I'm still here.
And Ron.
My name is Ron Hall. I have been in television just a teeny-weeny bit longer than you have. Yeah. Well, I was raised mostly in Rapid City, South Dakota. Spent my junior year of high school in North Hollywood, California, which was an eye-opener, but we went back to South Dakota. I've been educated in Dakota Wesleyan University, Syracuse University. My doctorate's from the University of Nebraska. I came to Lincoln having taken a bus trip from Syracuse University all the way west, down to Denver, down to a Texas town in the Panhandle, over to Oklahoma City, over to Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky. I stopped at every TV station. I had a one-page resume. I hadn't done anything. I'd been in the Army. I was a busboy in a hotel and a bellhop. That was my resume, but I had a master's degree in television. And I went and I interviewed Atlanta, Chicago. The last stop was Lincoln, Nebraska. And I was so tired. That was a bus, all those miles, knocking around and walking. I had no car when I got there. I walked to the stations and handed out my one-pager. I had 4 job offers from that trip. But I was really impressed with a man named Jack McBride. He was starting an educational television station. I was the 4th person hired. We had a secretary. There were 5 of us who started that place. And I literally fastened my little wagon to a star, his star. Pew. He saw the future, and we've had a wonderful life ever since. When I first came here, Jimmy Olsen was head of the Nebraska State Historical Society, which to me is one of the finest institutions, not just in this state, but in this country. It's a wonderful place. And I said, what should I read? I've never been in Nebraska before. He said, well, first read Old Jewels by Mari Sandoz. That will tell you what the people here are like. Then read her book, Crazy Horse, Strange Man of the Ogalallas. It's her favorite book, but I think you'll love it. It'll show you about the wisdom of the Ogallala people and the Indian people of this part of the country. That experience led me to Mari Sandoz, to be a good friend the last 10 years of her life, to John Neihardt, our poet laureate in perpetuity. And when I got to Washington and had this wonderful job at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, one of my board members, Kathleen Nolan, the actress, said, well, Mr. Hall, where are we not serving the American people? And I thought about that, and I thought, all of those years I was in Nebraska at the State Historical Society, history. We don't have a history series. It took me 3 years with a very talented staff to put together the money. We husbanded I had $42 million a year to give to producers, but a lot of it was committed. Finally put together $6 million. The stations put in $11 million. This was 1985. And that is the series that's on the air called The American Experience, and it's still going, and it is one of the finest documentary series. I take no credit for the quality, just for getting it off the ground with the money that that the federal government gave us, the people of the United States gave us. So it's had an enormous influence on my life, and it's enriched my life.
Well, in graduate school, we, of course, were forced to read certain things, but am I glad I did. It was Willa Cather.
Yeah.
It was in the English department, and it was Mari Sandoz. And so I began to get a feeling for Nebraska. Now, I've always been a big reader, but I have not been selective in my reading. I mean, I read anything. I read lots of books all over the place. I haven't paid any attention to style or form or structure. I was only interested in the story, much to my dismay after all these years, because when it came time for me to write a book, I didn't know where to begin. I really did not know, even though I've been a great reader.
You knew more than you knew you knew.
Oh, I knew more than I knew I knew.
Yeah.
So what I did was write about what isn't that what they say? Write about what you know.
Yes.
Well, I knew television. Yeah. I'd been in television since the first year out of high school, all those years when everything was live. That's what I knew about. So I wrote what I knew about.
Yeah, yeah. That's right. But you learn how to write, I think, by reading the great writers. I really do. Neihardt believed that. Sandoz believed that. She would list, you know, her top level of education was the 8th grade.
That is incredible.
But she read the masters. Yeah. The masters were her teacher. I learned so much from her. I'm not saying I'm a good writer, but I did a creative writing course with her on television. Mm-hmm. And I sat there just rapt listening to that woman talk about writing. It isn't writing so much as it is rewriting, refining, throwing away, starting over, writing again. That's lesson number 1. Well, Sandoz was one of the people. Virginia Faulkner at the University Press encouraged me a great deal. And she said, we've got to get Ron a book. She was working with Robert Knoll and Bernice Slotin and a lot of wonderful professors at the university. And I thought, well, what would I write about? But I thought about that, and she encouraged me. And the thing that motivated me mostly was that I realized that working in Lincoln in television, in Washington, in Vietnam during the war, I have met and known such interesting people. So many of those people are no longer living, and I thought, you know, they deserve extended lives. And I really started writing there about people because I wanted other people to appreciate what they've done for us. Sandoz gets a big piece of this. So does Neihardt. So does Virginia Faulkner. I mean, I wrote about what I knew, but I wrote about people I so thoroughly appreciated, and I want other people to appreciate as well. That was prime motivation.
Well, in my particular case, these stories have never been told. And channels 10, 11 going on the air in 1953, which was a few years ago. A lot of things had happened, a lot of changes in the technology between now and then. And I realized people, after all these years, would still come up to me and say, "You're Calamity Kate, I was on your show," and start to tell me the stories. And so I thought, well, maybe I should tell those stories. They've never been told. And the history of that station is basically in my brain, because as I began to track down, it was much harder work than I ever realized, because I wasn't writing a novel. I couldn't make it up. So names had to be spelled correctly, dates and times and places. And I began to track people. And you know what I discovered? Young girls who marry, most of whom do, and their name changes, you can't find them. So here I am searching, for 50 years ago and trying to find people. And so many were dead, and that was very inconsiderate of them to die and keep that information from me. And then, so to try to find then the people who are still alive who remember, and a lot of them couldn't, that was a long time ago, Leta, I can't remember that. So it was a lot more work than I had ever envisioned. But worth it, because even though there's very little footage, because in those days most everything was live, so it only can exist in our brains. So at least there's now a book, The Calamities of Kalamity Kate.
And some great pictures.
Oh,
You
yeah.
have stills.
So,
You have great stills.
Yeah.
You know, Sandoz always said it takes two things to write a good book. Nobody realizes how much work is involved.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to get into it, just be prepared. The other thing
No, they say don't give up your day. If you want to be a writer,
Yeah.
don't give up your day
that may be
job.
true. The other thing, quality, she said you had to bring to it, was a very high level of honesty. If you're not honest with what you write, if you're writing about your family or friends, you tend to soften things.
Yes.
Sandoz never softened anything. You got to tell it like it is. I think it's a good lesson for all of us. And I would like to say that there isn't a living human being watching this or not watching this who doesn't have a great story to tell. You do. Yeah. It takes a lot of work, and you got to be honest.
And since I went into this only with the idea of I'll write these stories, but I didn't know what you have to go through to get them published. I had no idea that you get, first of all, there's money involved. Books just don't materialize. So you got to get a publisher. You got to get an editor. I found these people myself, an editor, a layout and design person. Then how much is that book going to cost? What is the print? What is the binding? Where's it going to go? How is it going to be distributed? All these things that I never ever thought of 4 years prior, that there's all this to it. Much more goes into it than to promote it, to get it out there. And who is going to buy it? You got to pay back the publisher. Now, you went a different route. You might say how your route went.
I've had a long association with another wonderful institution, the University of Nebraska Press. The people that I respect so much. Virginia Faulkner was the one that really got me started there. Well, Bruce Nickel even before her. But one thing I learned, well, the press, of course, they either accept or reject.
Right.
But then they give you an editor, and they do all the work. Here's something I learned, though. The writer, this is my book, Backstage, Stories from My Life in Public Broadcasting. The writer, me, has nothing to do or to say about the design of the book or the title. That's the marketing department, this I learned, because, just a little aside here, I happen to have been born in a house of prostitution in Rapid City, South Dakota. And it was run by a wonderful woman, actually a fabulous, you can Google her, Dora Dufran. She was she was Calamity Jane's best friend, for example. She was.
Whoa.
She had houses, she had a prostitution, bars, and gambling in Deadwood, Belle Fourche, and Rapid City. The cowboys that frequented her establishments called her places Diddlin' Doras. So when I finished the manuscript and sent it into the press, or took it down, I thought I had a wonderful title. I had The Kid from Diddlin' Doras.
I'm glad you didn't use that.
The press didn't want that.
How do you spell diddlin'?
D-I-D-L-I-N apostrophe.
Whoa.
Diddlin'.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
And so anyway, it's all right because I love the look of the book. I love what they did. This is not my work. This is people at the press who did this, and I'm eternally grateful. And of course, they marketed.
Yeah. So,
Leta's a one-man marketing too.
You learn a lot. So you have a couple of ways to go. If they accept your book already, but when they take it away from you, then make decisions after that. Now, if you don't know what you're doing, like I did, I had to make all those decisions.
Well, I want to say
with some
this.
guidelines. I had some guidelines, though, fortunately.
One thing about the press, they would give, I had a great editor, and I would get all these notes, and I'd leave this out, or drop that, or change this, or put this up there, and bring that down there. But then she would always add, Ron, it's your book. If you have to have it in there, leave it in there. And I always appreciated that, but I listened to her a lot. I listened a lot, and there were a couple of things that I thought, no, No, it has to be between these pages. You know, that part of that honesty.
See, I had that situation. You know, one with Bill Eddy, who was my editor. He didn't agree. He thought that what I had to say was too strong, but it was the truth. It was the truth.
Yes.
It was strong. And he said, Leta, you can't say that. I said, but it's the truth. And I thought by naming the person that would authenticate it. And he said, no, he's going to sue you. This person will sue me if I said the truth. So I acquiesced to his better judgment as a former editor of the Lincoln Journal-Star and a writer himself, that he knew more about it. My first time writing. So if someone who knows what they're doing is saying, I don't think you should do that.
You should listen.
I listened, and so the name is not in the book.
We are here in the Jane Pope Geske Heritage Room of Nebraska Authors. It's a special collection dedicated to promoting and preserving works by and about Nebraska authors. It's a representative collection. It's not exhaustive because of space constraints, but we do have more than 13,000 volumes written by more than 3,000 Nebraska authors. In addition, we also have information files, magazines, pictures, manuscripts, artwork, and other memorabilia. In case you didn't know it, the Heritage Room is not tax funded. It's supported by the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association, and we would like to thank the NLHA for the endowment established a number of years ago through their volunteer efforts. And we are grateful to those who continue to contribute to the Heritage Room Endowment Fund. You're invited to visit the Heritage Room during our regular public service hours. We're located on the 3rd floor of Bennett Martin Public Library at 136 South 14th Street in downtown Lincoln. The Heritage Room is open Tuesday through Fridays from 12 noon until 3 p.m. and on Sunday from 2 to 5 p.m. So we're currently featuring this Ames Reading Series during our Sunday public service hours. The Ames readings are filmed by 5 City TV, and we're pleased that the recent Ames readings are also available through 5 City TV's video on demand site. We encourage you to check the Heritage Room website for more details about the Ames Reading Series. Today we feature Ron Hull and Leta Powell Drake. They are two well-known Nebraska television pioneers who have written books about their experiences and the personalities they've encountered, both in educational and commercial television. Ron Hull was born in Rapid City, South Dakota, and holds degrees from Dakota Wesleyan University, Syracuse University, and the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He arrived in Lincoln in 1955 and is senior advisor to Nebraska Educational Telecommunications, and he's also professor emeritus of broadcasting at UNL. Ron's going to share from his book, Backstage, Stories from My Life in Public Television, published in 2012 by the University of Nebraska Press. Leta Powell Drake was born in Duluth, Minnesota, and has lived in Nebraska since 1960. She holds a master's degree in theater from UNL, has spent 50 years in broadcasting, and is still active in television and theater. In August 2014, her first book, The Calamities of Kalamity Kate, A History of Nebraska's Children's TV Shows, was published by J&L Lee Company. We are delighted to have Ron and Leta with us here today. Please help me welcome them.
I am delighted so many of you are here on such a cold day. I really appreciate seeing you. I worked with Mari Sandoz for the last 10 years of her life and got to know her very well, as she did me. If she were here today, believe me, she would she loved to give speeches. She didn't like to take time away from her writing, but she did it for one reason. This reason. She would look each one of you in the face, I've seen her do it, and she would say, you have a great story to tell. And she wanted to be a catalyst to get you to tell that story. Then she would say, now, it takes two qualities that you've got to bring to it. Number one, hard work. You have no idea how much work is involved in writing a book worth somebody else's time. Two, you have to bring a very, very high level of honesty. She said, now if you're writing about your friends, your hometown, your society, whatever, people tend to soften things. Mari Sandoz didn't soften things, and she said, you can't. You got to tell it like it is. Her publisher, she had about 15 different publishers, which tells you something, said to her one time when she was writing, the book was finished, and he was reading, he said, Mari, we can't publish this. Those people out in western Nebraska are still alive out there. They're going to sue you, they're going to sue us, and we don't want that. And she said, no. Those people out in western Nebraska know that I know the whole story. If they sue me, they know I'm going to tell the rest. I've never been sued yet. That's really the kind of woman she was. She was very pragmatic. She was a workmanlike kind of writer. She wasn't a genius. She was the kind of person who wrote. She said, writing isn't writing so much as it is rewriting, refining, reading, throwing away, starting over, and writing it again and again and again. And she is so right. My motivation to write Backstage really stemmed from a number of catalysts. Mari Sandoz was one. I did a creative writing class with her on television. We did 7 half-hour lectures in 1959, and I really learned a lot about writing from her. Took it to heart. She was working with prominent professors like Robert Knoll and Bernice Sloat and Genevieve and all the rest down there. And she even said, we've got to get a book for Ron. And of course, at the time, I thought, what would I write about? Well, a lot of years has passed. Thanks to Virginia, partly, I wrote this book, motivated. I work in broadcasting. I have met and known so many valuable people who have done so much for our lives. The primary motivation was to extend their lives so that you would have some of the same appreciation that I have for a lot of the people that I write about. One is Virginia Faulkner, a brilliant, brilliant woman, and a large measure responsible for the prominence that the University of Nebraska Press has achieved. She was a brilliant editor. I think anybody that worked with her would tell you that. She had quite a reputation before. She wrote with other writers 2 Greta Garbo movies. She wrote for Fred Allen's radio show. She wrote, you've all heard of the book probably, A House Is Not a Home, Polly Adler's book. Virginia wrote that book, a huge bestseller in the United States. She created a character called Princess Tulip for Town and Country magazine, which was competition to the New Yorker, and very popular. All the stores on Fifth Avenue used Princess Tulip in their advertising. And what she said about Princess Tulip was, Princess Tulip got up with the birds and went to bed with anything. And it sort of reflects Virginia's style and her humor. I simply loved her. I mentioned A House Is Not a Home. You'll discover, if you haven't already, well, I don't know. I've given this speech quite often. I happen to have been born in Dora Dufran's House of Prostitution in Rapid City, South Dakota. Now, Dora was a very, very well-known, you can Google her, woman of the Wild West in the Black Hills. When she had a house, bar, gambling. She had in Belfouche, Deadwood, Rapid City. She was Calamity Jane's best friend back in 1908. When Calamity died, Dora paid for her grave marker. Go to Mount Moriah on Deadwood right now, and you'll see the monument and everything. Dora paid for it. Dora is buried right across the aisle from Calamity and Wild Bill Hickok. I feel like I'm related to Calamity Jane, absolutely. But I don't want to just leave it there. She was quite a wonderful person and very respected. She had a heart a mile wide. The sheriff loved her in Rapid City. She'd go down to the railroad station, get homeless men, feed them. She always had a Thanksgiving dinner in Rapid City for all the people that couldn't afford it. Now, if you read the book, there's a duplication of my birth certificate. You know, it's just a regular birth. It gives my mother's name, and we don't know if that's authentic, and the father's name, and it says boy, and then it says legitimate, question mark, and there's a no, and check no. and then, let's see, the best part was down below. It says attending physician, that's crossed out. Something else over here is crossed out, but the word midwife is showing, and it's signed, Dora DeFran. When I finally got those files opened, about 8 years ago, and I saw Dora DeFran, I almost wept. Because I'd heard about that, but there it was, Dora, and Dora carried me to the Alex Johnson Hotel where the social worker was, and along came a wonderful couple, Nettie and Darrell Hull, and they took me home. Now, also in the book, I talk about the early years of NET. And I want to just share a little bit about how we got started. The man who deserves the credit for NET, the initial credit, is a wonderful man named Jack McBride. Excuse me. It was his vision. I literally came to Lincoln and fastened my little wagon to his star, and we just, it's been a wonderful, well, for me, it's been 60 years ride. We had a good ride together for over 50 years. I'll give you an example of how we got started. We had no cameras, we had no microphones, we had no studio. We had a brilliant man who decided there was going to be public broadcasting in the state of Nebraska. John Fetzer owned Channel 10, where Leta worked. He had bought out Channel 10, which was KFOR TV, owned by the Stewart family, because it was going broke and they were tired of losing all that money. And then he took Channel 10 for his own. In a very smart move, Eisenhower might have said enlightened self-interest. That's okay. He was a smart businessman. He was good to us. He went to Chancellor Clifford Hardin, Byron Dunn at the bank, and said, if you'd like to start an educational television station, there's a VHF channel available, which was really a pot of gold. And that's how Channel 12 came about. Now, the first summer I was here working, I got an assignment from the YWCA. They wanted us to teach swimming on television. When Jack said, you're going to teach a swimming class, I said, we don't have any movie cameras to film at a pool, and there are lots of them in Lincoln. We don't have a remote truck. There's no pool within... There's no water. And he said, we've got to do this. The YWCA really wants to do it, and here's what we did. I hope you might be familiar with limbo lighting. Limbo lighting is used when you can't afford sets or anything. You have black drapes, you have a black floor, and when the camera, you put a bright light on a person, all you see is that person. So I took an ironing board, and I painted it black. We put it on the black, and we had about a 12-year-old young girl in a bathing suit on the ironing board where her arms are free, and her teacher in a bathing suit is behind it, you know, working with her and getting her legs. I had a fish tank, no fish. One student's job was to stand at the side of the fish tank and ripple the water so there'd be waves, because I would use one camera on the water with the waves, and I superimposed that halfway up the young girl swimming. And we had a big success, and the YWCA loved it. You have to do these things when you don't have any money. Takes a little thought. I write about Dr. John Neihardt. There was a wonderful woman at the State Historical Society, Phyllis Winkleman, who had known him at the University of Missouri where he was teaching. And she said, "Ron, you've just got to meet this man." And, you know, he was a poet. I'd not heard of him, I'm ashamed to say. But she just kept driving and driving. And I said, "But how are we going to get him up to Lincoln? It costs money." And she said, "Well, I don't know, but it doesn't cost that much to fly him up." We didn't have any out-of-pocket cash to do that. Our total budget for our 5 people was $60,000 a year. Jack McBride was making $7,000 a year. I was making $4,200. That gives you a little idea what the rest of the people were making. I went to Adam Breckenridge over in the administration building, wonderful administrator. And he said, "Well, how much do you need?" I said, "Well, I need $60 to fly him up." And he gave me $60 out of some. And we brought Dr. Neihardt. And Dr. Neihardt made a big difference in educational television. We sold his books and we got viewers. He was literally one of those people that would look in the camera and you just believed him and his poetry and his wisdom. I taped, Robert Knoll did this interview. He did the Death of Crazy Horse from Black Elk Speaks. Takes 24 minutes to recite. He was 81 years old. I put the camera on him. Robert introduced him. And he looked at that camera and he recited, didn't make a mistake, verbatim for 24 minutes. And when we finished, and I had the half hour done, I went in the studio and I said, "How did you do that? You're 81 years old." He said, "Age, it's just a number. Turn it around. I'm 18. That same day, I actually had 2 other shows to tape with him. I only had him for 1 day, and I wanted to get 2 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. And so I got the first one done, and then I said, "Okay, we'll all take 10 minutes, and then we'll do the second one, The Life and Times of John Neihardt." And Neihardt said, "A young fella?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "The boys and I," that was Robert and the crew, "boys and I decided we want to go down to Leb Sox and have a glass of beer." I looked at him and I said, "Dr. Neihardt, you don't want to have a beer before you do a television program, do you?" He said, "Well, I had one before I did this one." So there you are. I'm going to stay on time here. I just have to, I can tell you about this, I guess. I'm going to tell you about Sandy Dennis. You'll remember her. I write about the famous and the not so famous. But I really, if I got to know them, then I felt I could write about them. Sandy was an honest person. She even said, you know, I knew her boyfriends well. She had 3 men in her life, for example. Jerry O'Loughlin was a wonderful actor and loved her. And they were together for 7 years up on West End Boulevard. And he wanted to marry her, and he wanted a family. And she said, "No, I think if you get married and you have children, you should be home with them." And she said, "I'm not going to be there. I want to be out there on that stage, in that light." I think it's a very honest way to live your life. That's what she did. I got to know a lot of people through Sandy Dennis. I'll tell you one episode. I was in New York. She was doing a play with Geraldine Page called, it was Alan Ayckbourn's Absurd Person Singular. It's a fabulous comedy. Even when I think of it today, And Sandy was wonderful in it. You know, she got 2 Tony Awards for New York, and she got 1 Academy Award for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Actors respect her. She truly was a talented, talented American actor. Well, I went by her theaters over the years so many times, the doorman knew me. I could say, I want to go up and see Sandy, and they'd say, up you go. And I would sit in her dressing room and before the show, and I'd always have a house seat from her. And this particular night was the Alan Ayckbourn show. And I was just sitting there, and Sandy was over there finishing her makeup and in the mirror, and there was a knock on the door. And she said, Ron, get that. And I went over, and here was the bag lady of 3rd Avenue. I am not kidding. Overshoes, I don't know, layered clothing, big old coat on, a scarf over her head, 2 shopping bags loaded. She's standing there, and I have the door open looking at her, and she looks at Sandy, she says, good luck tonight, honey. And Sandy said, thank you, and closed the door. I said, who was that? She said, well, that's Jerry Page. I said, Geraldine Page. Well, I went out into the theater then. Geraldine Page came on stage. It was an upper-class East Side New York apartment. Chandeliers, jewels, hair piled. In sweeping Geraldine Page. Whew, she looked like $1 million. She was beautiful. And of course, she dominates the stage. She was an Academy Award. And it was unbelievable. After the play, I went back. The same thing happened. Here she comes with her shopping bags and everything, going out to catch the bus. I mean, she was eccentric, okay? But I said after she left the second time, I said, Sandy, I can't believe this. And she said, Ron, she's an actor. And I said, oh, yeah, okay. That explains it. But there is more, but I don't have time. Let's see. Yeah, I have time to tell you this, I think, because it's such a lesson I learned. I think every teacher probably experiences what I did. I write about Vietnam a lot. I spent 19 months in Vietnam. We built 4 towers for TV stations. Actually, the government sent me back. I spent a year there in 1966 during the war. They sent me back in 1970, and twice back in 1971, and then we turned the whole thing over to the Vietnamese, and they did it. When I first got there, we didn't have a tower, and we were using an old, I don't know if you remember, I love that airplane, a Constellation. It was such a graceful looking plane. And we had 2 tape recorders on it. We had a little mini studio. You could, even a camera for announcing, flexible antenna that after we got up at 10,000 feet, they would push that antenna out at the back end, and we'd fly up over Saigon. That was the first target, and broadcast 2 hours, 3, we got at the most 3 hours of stuff done. All we had was what we did live. A few films that had been produced in Vietnam. English was not permitted on there, strictly for the Vietnamese. This airplane, I never want to glamorize the war because it wasn't glamorous. But I will tell you about the plane because it was run by young Navy men, and we had 2 planes. Because one would be flying, one would be on the ground. They were repairing it for all the bullet holes because the Viet Cong were always surrounding Tan Son Nhut Airport and shooting at every plane in sight. So this is how they'd get the plane. I only flew in it once, or well, maybe twice, but very seldom. I went out there. The young Navy guy handed me this, what was obviously a bulletproof vest. And so I put it on, and it ties in a bow. I thought it was so funny, little bows down the front. Anyway, and then I got up in the plane, and he said, you don't wear that thing. The bullets come from the ground up. You sit on it. I said, oh, took it off. Then I thought, oh, how terrible, you know. But to avoid problems of getting shot down, the plane would be on the runway, and it just getting the motors going and going and going. The wings were literally going like this, and then it would go as short as possible, and then right straight up in the air. Our feet were on the ceiling like that. And once we leveled off, you look around, and it's one of the nicest moments of my life, those few times I saw it, with the lights of Saigon, because I knew Saigon pretty well by then. I'd been there a few months. The people were living in cardboard boxes. I mean, they'd all come into the cities where they were safer. I think about those little kids, and I saw them all the time. And I thought, you know, we worked hard today. We taped things like where to get your bubonic plague shots, educational things, health things, things for parents, music. They loved their music. We did a lot of that. But I can still remember looking out the window of the plane at all the lights up to north and over to Cambodia and over to the China Sea and down to the Delta, and thinking, are we doing any good for those kids? You know, is that signal reaching into those huts and those hovels and the apartments or wherever the people live? We put TV sets all over the country, free TV sets. You just don't know. And teachers, I think, don't always know what they did or what they accomplished. You do your best, and then you think, you let it fall where it may. But we all know, when we look back on the great teachers we've had, of what the power they had. I have to be through in about 3 minutes, and I'm going to share one last thing with you. Let's see, where's my book? I was married to a very, very remarkable person, and she was, as you might say, my anchor and more. But I just want to read this one little passage to you, because it gives you a little picture of what she was like and how I so benefited in my life from her. Her training was being a counselor to the terminally ill. She took classes at Bryan Hospital, clinical pastoral education. She was ordained in full. She was a deacon in the Methodist Church, ordained in full connection with the church, I think is how the church reads it. But she worked in the hospitals and the hospices for St. Paul Church, but all for over 22 years. I just want to tell you this story, and then I'm through. One January day, Noni came home and told me of a 19-year-old college woman who had just been diagnosed with acute leukemia. She was given 3 or 4 months to live. This young woman with shining hair, bright, beautiful eyes, perfect skin, and she knew that her time was nearly spent. A few weeks later, while she was coming to terms with her condition, and it took about 3 months, she said to Noni, "Mrs. Hull, I am afraid of dying some night here in the dark, all alone. I want to be among the living with life going on around me in the sunshine, if possible. Can you promise me that?" "I cannot promise you anything, but it could happen the way you want it," Naomi said. Then 2 months later, Naomi came home from work and said to me, "Well, this morning I stopped by at 7 a.m. to say hello, and I told her I'd be back after I'd seen a couple of patients going in for surgery. They were just helping her into her wheelchair, getting her ready for the day." She got her wish. 2 hours later, they found her sitting in her chair in the sunroom, surrounded by people and activities, her head to one side, as if she were asleep. I said to Noni, I said, I would be terrible at your job. I couldn't do it. She said, you would be terrible. You'd pat the person on the back and tell them they're going to be okay, and they are not going to be okay. But she brought intelligent, pragmatic, useful, and loving care to her ministry. And in closing, oh, I'll get it. I have something I always like to say about NET. Why not? For 59 years, those of us who work at NET have been dedicated to bring you radio and television programming that's worth your time to every Nebraskan. People, each one of us, as remember Joseph Camel and that wonderful Bill Moyers program? People are yearning to find meaning in their lives. And that's as true of you as it is me or anybody else. Well, my hope, one of my hopes about this book is that if you read it, it'll give you some insight into some people that I feel have really found meaning in their lives. And I really appreciate your coming out today to see Leta. Thank you. Thank you.
Wherever we go, whatever we do, we're gonna go through it together. Are you listening to me, Ron? We've been doing everything together since 1960. Well, not everything. When you think about this, he worked for Nebraska Public Television. He first worked for Channel 10. He directed the shows on Saturday in the afternoon. So he worked for Channel 10 and 11. I worked for Channel 10 11. He works for Nebraska Public Television. I work for Nebraska Public Television. And then he loves the theater. I love the theater. He wrote a book. I wrote a book. But he's one up on me because he wrote the introduction, the preface to my book. So you'll have to write another book so I can. We've been in this for a long time, and we have been friends for a very, very long time. Now, how many of you people in here watched any of the children's television shows on Channel 10, 11? Oh my goodness. All right, how many of you were on the show or actually were a parent who brought your children? How many were on any of those shows? Betty Stevens, you were a child on the show? Oh, you brought your children.
That's what you got.
Yeah, that's how. And you know the right questions, too. Well, let's see. Okay, then, for those of you who either watched any of the shows or were on, then you know that this is one of the original costumes, and it doesn't fit. Okay? All right, I can get into it. But I can't breathe, I can't digest, and the blood doesn't flow to the legs. So if you just see me going, would somebody call 911? Okay, they're going to call 911. All right. I happen to have, and this is so precious because we have so little video of those days. Here is the opening to Cartoon Corral, and it runs for 29 seconds. Roll it.
Here she comes, Calamity Kate. She's on the move, stretch and relate. Everybody grab a friend. Show wagon comes from a bend. Clippity-clap, clippity-clap. Kate is shouting, giddy up. Lining in with those flash feet. Ready to run you and me. Hurry up now, we can't wait. Here she comes, Calamity Kate. Calamity
Matt Dawson, you get up. Come on now. He can sing that open. Here we go. Here we go. Come on up here.
Okay.
Here she comes.
Calamity Kate. She's on the move 'cause she can't be late. Everybody grab your pal. Time to start Cartoon Corral. Is that
Yeah,
what?
that's good. Isn't that marvelous? Okay. KOLN went on the air on April the 18th, 1953. How many of you had television sets in 1953? A handful. Well, you were the early adopters. Because do you know well, you probably knew, or your parents knew, what those sets cost. Because you got the big console that was on that lovely wood, very expensive, small screen in black and white and kind of fuzzy, but you had this beautiful piece of furniture, and it cost anywhere from $650 to $700, which in 1953 would have been a great deal of money. So you few who did it must have been really early adopters or very rich. Which was it? Because I know I started working in television before we even had a television set at home. I happen to have, you'll look for it later, but the first day's log, a copy of the first day's log at Channel 10, and it is a riot. Because they went on the air on February the 18th, 1953, at 4:45 in the afternoon with the test pattern. And the test pattern ran for 15 minutes. Now, they actually did have a news, weather, and sports at 6:30, and then at 10 o'clock at night. There were 3 movies. So that's what was really happening in the early days. Remember, everything else was live, other than the movies, which were sent in the U.S. postage, and those great big reels. But everything was live. In fact, that's one of the reasons we don't have much video or background to share with you, because everything was live or the tapes were erased. So once in 1953. The whole concept of television, of course, served the public, certainly, but it's a business. Going to make money. Okay, how can we make some more money? Because things were difficult in, the first couple of years. So children's shows were springing up all over the country in major cities. And there was a formula. So you take somebody who's already on staff, so they know how to do it, and you get a host. And usually it would be a male, and you lots of cowboys out there. Give them a funny hat, give them a funny costume. Get a supportive person to corral the kids. What you do is you have birthday parties for the kids, throw in a couple of cartoons, and you make money because you're selling it to local advertisers. So the first 2 advertisers on KOLN TV for Cartoon Corral were McDonald's, way back in 1953, and Peter Pan Bread. Do any of you remember Peter Pan Bread? All right. Our first, the first really live children's television was, if you want to go to the next slide, there we go, Sheriff Bill and Silent Orv. Now, Bill Hempke was the operations director. See, so they took someone who was already on staff, knew how it would be, gave him a funny hat and an outfit, and he became Sheriff Bill. The Sheriff of the West. Bill is still with us, but he is not well. He's getting way up into age, but he's still with us. Unfortunately, Silent Orv has been silenced forever. We lost Orv about 4 or 5 years ago, Orville Wissink, and he was a part of the floor crew, so they just brought him in, and he corralled the kids. So that was the whole concept. They did the show for about 10 years, until Bill Hempke decided that he was going to move to the Arizona territory, namely Tucson, Arizona, and play golf. He was a very good golfer. So after 10 years, he resigned, he retired, and he moved on. So a new character had to come on. Now, I wanted to be a space person because I was a licensed pilot, or I began learning to fly at that particular time. And so I wanted to be the queen of space. And I could wear a silver lame jumpsuit and get rid of that stupid old Cartoon Corral Western set and have a shining rocket ship to the moon. Well, management thought that was a pretty stupid idea. And they said, we got a lot of money invested in this set. You know, well, the set was already 10 years old. All it was a bunch of old wooden and plastic trees and some bales of hay. But anyway, so I became Calamity Kate, the West's only sheriff, only lady sheriff. Now, this was the very first costume. I had no costume budget. So I went around looking for something Western. I did have the boots. In fact, I'm still wearing those boots. They don't fit as well as they used to. Then my feet. Do your feet shrink? You think so?
I do.
Oh, you do. He agrees that feet shrink. Okay. So I found this at the Gateway Western store, and I paid $6 for the top. And I paid $6 for the bottom, so there were $12 were invested in that costume. And I paid cash. You're not impressed? And I don't think we even had charge cards wouldn't have had charge cards then in those days. Yeah. Okay. So the wig came from Lucille Durer. Remember in fact, the Lucille, I think she just passed away not that long ago, but still the Lucille Durer wig supplies are still here. This is over 50, almost 50 years old, this wig. So, and the person who's wearing it is that many years older to it. And neither of us are holding up. This used to be bigger. I had bigger hair back then. That too is shrinking. All right, now let's take a look at what the studio looked like to the children who were coming in for the first time. Now think about this. You're a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kid. You're coming into the studio. Look at those big black cameras, GE cameras. Look at the big cables. Look at all those men hanging around on the floor crew. Look at all the lights, the Klieg lights and the scoop lights. And it's hotter than hell in there. And so the kids are frightened, and some of them peed their pants and weren't quite certain what they were going to do. And then I got to greet them and welcome them and hope that they'd stay with us. But that was the first feeling of a child walking into the studio and really being rather terrified by the whole thing. Now, we had to have sponsors, of course, and I mentioned the first sponsors were McDonald's and Peter Pan Bread. And so McDonald's brought over, and of course this was free because they got promotion out of this, they brought a box of McDonald's hamburgers. And there were 25 in the box. And they would leave it at the front desk. They'd come about 3 o'clock. The show was live at 3:30. And I asked for 25 each day. We would have approximately 20 children on the show. But in case, somebody brought along, and sometimes neighborhood kids just came along, or people brought friends, or some kid would spill their hamburger on the floor, so we wanted to have a little extra. In fact, I will show you the stain I have on this outfit from some kid dropping a hamburger on my belly. There it is. Otherwise, this outfit looks pretty good, except for that great big splotch of hamburger. But anyway, so we had about 25 hamburgers in the box. Now, what happened is, when the hamburgers arrived at the front desk at KOLN TV, the odor, the scent wafted up through the building. And our staff, when they smelled that, they would come snooping around the front desk, and if the receptionist wasn't there, they'd take one of the hamburgers. And it made me so mad because, when I'd get in, the studio, half the box was gone because the bloody staff ate them. So I really blew my stack on that, but they'd make sure that the receptionist wasn't there because they didn't have the guts to. Bob Johnson, remember Bob Johnson? He was the first one. He was one of our salespeople. He was very good at that. Okay, now, many of the children, Well, some of the kids who were little wrote stories, and I kept some of these stories. I wish now that I had kept everything. But at that time, I didn't know that the program was going to be on that long, or that down the road, many years later, I would write a book. So when things were happening, I remembered a lot of stuff in my brain, but I knew I couldn't really write that. And I just saved bits and pieces of little things. And so when it came to the point in time where I thought, I'm going to write this book, I at least had something. I had bits and pieces, but no order with anything. So it was really tough about that. So I want to thank Jeff Korbelick of the Lincoln Journal-Star, because I hadn't really thought seriously about writing a book until I was inducted into the Nebraska Broadcasters Hall of Fame. And Jeff Korbelick wrote a story called A Roundup of Memories, and he wanted kids to write stories about their experiences. And he gave me almost a full page. And when I saw that and I read those stories, I laughed, I cried, I couldn't believe, and I said, by gum, that done. I am going to write a book and capture these stories. Now, trying to reach some of the girls in particular was very, very difficult, because as you well know, most girls get married, and then their name changes, and you can't find them. You've lost them. So it was much more difficult than I ever thought. But the stories that I liked the best were the ones that were written by an adult looking back. And here is one of my favorite. I want you to take a look at John Ellis from Lincoln, Nebraska. He's the little boy sitting there in the front wearing the crown. And he wrote a story which he called Who Let the Dog Out? This was in 1958, or 1968, excuse me. He was about 5 years old. Calamity made us feel all at ease, apparently too much in case of my family's taste. Back home, my mother, my sister Beth, and my brother Mark were all watching. Calamity asked the kids what New Year's resolutions they had made. My hand shot up rather quickly. My mom, my brother, and my sister at home were very excited that I was going to answer the question on statewide television. And when Kate called upon me, I said loudly and proudly, "Don't let the dog out of the house when she's in heat." I had no idea what in heat meant. Except I just knew that if she was in it, she shouldn't go out. I kind of figured that out when the neighborhood dogs were all lined up outside waiting for her. That it was probably not okay for her to go out and play as much as she begged. That's a perler, like. Apparently, people didn't fix their dogs in 1968. I do remember getting in trouble for letting her out and her getting pregnant. Hence the importance of my sharing my resolution with the world. Kate handled it perfectly, not skipping a beat. And why shouldn't you let the dog out when she's in heat, John? Because then she has puppies. I think Nebraska learned a very good lesson that day. Cartoon Corral was fun and educational. John Ellis, Lincoln, Nebraska. I just think that's so darling. All right. Now, another little boy by the name of Michael Hemmett wrote a story. And I love the way he told it. Now, this is coming from him, not from me. His two older sisters and he were standing there. And Calamity Kate came up to the first sister and said, "What do you want for your birthday?" And she said, "I want a tape recorder." So I turned the second girl and I said, "What do you want for your birthday?" And she said, "I want a tape recorder." So the little boy, he thought, well, gosh, they both want tape recorders. I better say I want a tape recorder too. So when Calamity asked me, "What do you want for your birthday?" he said, "I want a tape recorder too." And I said, "You all three want tape recorders? What are you going to record?" The little boy says, "We're going to put the tape recorder under my mom and dad's bed at night and record them kissing." Okay. And then, as I was writing the book, and I had a long way to go, but a woman came up to me in an OLLI class at the university and said, "Oh, my girls were on your show." Well, that's nice, but that's not a story. So I've got to pull it. You know, I try to pull to see if I can, and I said, "Oh, well, what was going on? What time was it? And what about?" She said, "Well," she said, the girls were dressed, my girls were twins, and they were dressed exactly alike. And so I went to the first one. Let's see, what did I say? I went to the first girl, and I'm trying to think exactly how that went. She said, let's see. Well, gosh, my brain is not functioning. Give me that story. I'm trying to remember exactly what well, let's see. Yes. Wait a minute now. It's coming to me now. No, it's not coming to me. That's what happens to when your brain atrophies. This is called, well, she said, my girls were on your show, and you said to them, because they were dressed alike, "Oh, you two look so much alike. Are you sisters?" And they said, "No, we're twins." I said, "Oh, twins." And then ask the obvious question, well, which one of you came first? And they said, "No, we were born at the same time." Well, now, I'm not going to have a discussion with two 5-year-olds about the birthing process on live television. So I said, "Well, I think one of you came first." She said, "No, we were born at exactly the same minute." Well, now, I'm not going to argue, so I just let it go. Now, for the rest of the story. Mother's name is Carol Vermeer, and she and her husband did not have any children. They adopted a boy, then they adopted a girl, and then she got pregnant. Now, this is back in the 1960s. So think about it. The OBGYN specialists in town at that time were Dr. Garlinghouse and Dr. Harvey. And when she went to them and he said that she was pregnant, they didn't have the ultrasound. They didn't do all that stuff. In those days, you're pregnant, go home, call me again when the baby comes. Now, the odd thing is Dr. Garlinghouse was a twin himself. He didn't know she was having twins. She didn't know she was having twins. And you know what happens when you're carrying twins, usually? They come early, because that's too much for the body to handle. 6 weeks early, the twins started to come. So, emergency room, the Lincoln General Hospital, and Dr. Garlinghouse and Dr. Harvey are called in, and it says on the birth certificate that the two girls were born at 9:28 a.m. at exactly the same time. Jody and Joni, and so they were telling the truth. Now, we know they weren't born at the same time, but nevertheless, that's what it says. So the little girls were telling the truth right from the beginning. How am I doing time-wise? I'm going to move right along here. Okay, let me just think now. Let's see. Okay. Let me see. Oh, yes. After this, we wanted to make a change in the show and contemporize it a little more. And so the George Shirley Puppet Company came aboard and did a wonderful job with some very, very talented people. And so there was something. This is Puppet Gulch, and we would have lots of interaction with the kids and the puppets. And then, in order to change the show even more, we added the Quiz Kids. Now, this was very special because these were 4th, 5th, and 6th graders from all across the state who participated, and these were the smart kids. The questions came from the Educational Service Union, so we didn't just make up stuff. They were very much researched, and this was a lot of work, but it was well worth it. The kids knew what subject areas they're going to be working on, so they as a team worked at their various schools, and then they came to compete on live television or videotape And boy, they got a big prize. I think they got $25. The team who won got $25, and the team who came in second got $10. They all got one penny from Lincoln Federal Savings and Loan, a freshly minted penny for everybody in their class, and everybody got a Calamity Kate postcard. So that was pretty good. Okay, so one of the people I think you might see up on the, is that right-hand corner? Is that you, Matt? Yeah, where are you? Where are you?
To the left of Cheryl. I'm on
Are you on the upper deck?
oh yeah, in the big.
Well, stand up so everybody can see. He was one of the smart kids. He was one of the quiz kids. Yeah. Oh, okay, and the guy in the middle, this was Cathedral of the Risen Christ. That's Father Vasa from the Cathedral of the Risen Christ. Do you know who he is now? He is the Bishop of Santa Clara, California. So we only pick the very best when we do Cartoon Corral. Okay, now, here's the interesting thing. I came to a presentation like this late last fall, and when they finished the presentation, a young girl ran up to me and says, that's me. See, that's me on the back of your book. She said, and I'm on this page. That's me. That's me right there. And I was just taken aback by this young lady. And she said, there's Matt, and there's Frank, and there's somebody. Said, where were you when I was writing the book? I mean, that's just exactly, she named everything and everybody. And, you know, I was brokenhearted. I was brokenhearted because if I'd only had that information, which I didn't have. And so I said, you went to the Cathedral of the Risen Christ. Are you Catholic? And she said, yes. And I said, do you have any children? She said, 6. I said, you are Catholic. Okay. Well, you wouldn't have time to do, you know, for a job. And she said, oh, yes, I'm the librarian. She's the librarian. Stand up, Vicki Pike Clark. Stand up, Vicki. She's the librarian at the Walt Library right now. She had this room. She was in charge of this room, the curator of the Heritage Room for 10 years. Roughly, yeah. And so that little girl back there waving, and a big picture of her right here, and this is on page 119. There she is, and she said, I remember it specifically because the next day I had to go in to be fitted for glasses. And I was very worried about that. So I see that you're wearing glasses. Of course, I am now, after all these years, too. But she was a great help, and I just wish that I had found you before, but you're here today, and so what a special time. Now, very, very quickly, Romper Room was started in 1964, and Nancy Spearman was the first Romper Room teacher. Her husband, Bob Spearman, was in the journalism department of the University of Nebraska. Now, you had to be qualified to do this, the first teachers. You had to have a college degree, you had to have a teaching certificate. You could only wear a certain kind of clothing. Nothing could be above your knee. You could not wear pants or slacks at all. You had to be dressed properly like a teacher. And the thing is, it looked, the program, when you were talking 4- and 5-year-olds, looked kind of loosey-goosey. But it wasn't. It was highly, I gotta watch my time. It was highly constructed. Burt Claster Productions produced this, WBAL TV in Baltimore. And there was a very strict format that you had to go through. And so you had to abide by all this stuff. So it looked like a bunch of little kids just running around, waving the flag and saying Pledge Allegiance and so forth. But actually it was tightly scripted. The key and its success around the country, because it aired in 261 markets, and it was leased out, as it were. You had a local teacher and you had local children. And that was the key, and it was very, very successful. All right, the second romper room teacher was Miss Brianna Buteau Benjamin. Nobody could pronounce Brianna, so they called her Miss Ann. She was the second one, but she could do the magic mirror, and I think you can do that too, can't you, Miss Vicki? Can you do? No, who can you? You can do that. Well, who does that? Somebody was going to do that with me.
Oh, that was me.
Was that you? That was past tense? All right. Well, now, okay. All right. I will say this first, then I'll tell them what really happened. Romper, bumper, stomper, boo. Tell me, do. Magic mirror, tell me today. Did all my friends have fun at play? Oh, I see Ron, and I see Kathryn, and I see Steve, and I see Colleen, and I see Scott, and I see Vicky. But Vicky knows the real story because she was on the show. She was on every show. She was on the Quiz Kids. She was on Cartoon Corral. She was on Romper. She was the television star back then. But what she said is when Miss whoever the teacher happened to be, Miss Linda was Linda Phipps was her romper room teacher. That when they started the show, there was a mirror that was solid, and you held it up and romper, bumper, stomper, boo, and then there was a swirling around. Then what happened is she saw the teacher take that mirror and put it in a drawer and pull out one that looked like that. So it was a fake. And she couldn't see those kids at home. When I see Colleen and I see Mary and she couldn't see. Now, the only way you could get your name is you had to send a postcard in to KOLN-TV to Romper Room, and your name was Ann or Mary, and then you could, that's the way. And if nobody sent in cards, then they made them up. Okay. All right. Okay. It's a long, lovely career I had, but things were changing, and in 1987, the last of the live children's television shows, they were all gone. And the reason being is that syndicated children's television shows started to appear, and they were offered free to children. And these were high production things. And what they did was they got national sponsors for those, and leaving about a minute and a half in it for local sponsorship, and they gave it to the stations for free. So that was a lot easier to handle than all these live children's shows that we did all those years, and they will never be back. The live children's shows won't be back at all. So in 1987, that was it. Long time ago, but really very special memories. Now, the closing song was sung by Dave Landis. You know, and he has a beautiful voice. He really has, and that closes out the show. And he sang, now it's time. Now our time with you is through. Hope we've made a friend or two, but for now we have to say goodbye. Goodbye. Bye.